Welcome to another deep dive, everybody. This time we're taking a trip back to 1966, the golden age of black and white television. It's the year Ultra Q first hit the airwaves. You know, the show that's like the cool granddaddy of the whole Ultraman universe.
It's funny you mentioned that. Ultra Q is technically the first entry in the franchise,
Yeah.
but get this, Ultraman himself. Nowhere to be found.
No, Ultraman. It's wild. But it still set the stage for, one of the most iconic heroes of all time.
It's true. Like, watching Ultra Q was like peeking behind the curtain before the main event.
And speaking of digging deeper, you've pulled together some awesome resources for us today. My Drama List, Reddit, IMDb, Wikipedia, even a whole fandom wiki. It's amazing to see how passionate people still are about Ultra Q all these years later.
Right. And they give us such a cool range of viewpoints. We've got everything, like fan reactions, hardcore trivia, some really deep analysis. It's all there.
Okay, so mission objective for this deep dive. What made Ultra Q tick? Why is it more than just like a fun fact in TV history? And why should folks even care about watching it today?
To really get it, you got to jump back to 1960s Japan. It was the peak of this thing they called the kaiju boom.
Kaiju boom, like monsters on the loose everywhere.
Right. Giant monsters. There was
Yeah.
total rock stars. Movies, TV, comics. I'm talking Godzilla, Gamera, the whole city-smashing crew.
Makes sense, right? So TBS, the network behind Ultra Q, they're seeing dollar signs. Got to capitalize on that monster madness.
Absolutely. But there's this other twist, too, like a secret ingredient in the mix. Ultra Q had, a different flavor than just pure monster mayhem.
Oh, yeah. Tell me more about this twist.
The creators, they were super into shows like The Twilight Zone, The
Yeah.
Outer Limits. They wanted that same kind of vibe, strange and unusual. They were using sci-fi to sort of poke at the anxieties of the time, like all that stuff going on in the world, but through a sci-fi lens.
Whoa. So Ultra Q, it's like monster flicks meet the Twilight Zone.
Exactly. It's this whole genre in Japan they call it tokusatsu, big on special effects, storytelling that's, a wild mix of sci-fi, fantasy, horror. And Ultra Q, well, it kind of kicked off that whole movement.
Wow. Talk about leaving a legacy. And here's another fun fact. We heard Ultra Q was the most expensive TV show ever made in Japan at the time.
Yeah, it's true. And considering they didn't exactly have unlimited cash, that's pretty wild.
So how'd they manage to pull that off?
Enter Eiji Tsuburaya, the special effects genius behind Ultra Q. He knew how to stretch a budget. Picture this. He basically goes to the Toho prop warehouse, Toho, the studio behind all those big monster movies, and he's like, I'll take that, and oh, definitely that. Recycling monster suits, props, you name it.
Wait, are you telling me some of the Ultra Q monsters were just recycled Godzillas and Rodans in disguise?
Yep. You're looking at Goen's the first monster we see, and guess what? It's a modified Godzilla suit. They even use sets and props from Mothra versus Godzilla, King Kong versus Godzilla, even Frankenstein Conquers the World. It's like monster movie thrift shopping, but genius level.
That's so cool. It's like they built this whole monster universe on a shoestring. And somehow it totally works.
You don't always need millions to make something unforgettable. Imagination can take you a long way.
That's a good lesson for all of us, right? So we've got monsters, we've got that Twilight Zone vibe, a tiny budget, but huge ambition. What about the actual stories, though? The weirdness we're in for?
Well, you mentioned Kinagan's Cocoon earlier, right?
Yeah, that one where the greedy kid turns into this giant clam monster.
That episode, it's like the perfect recipe for Ultra Q. You've got your humor, you've got social commentary, you've got pure sci-fi weirdness. So this kid Kinagan, right? He's obsessed with money. Starts hoarding it in this massive cocoon he builds in his room. Then, boom, freaky science stuff happens, and he turns into this clam monster that only wants cash.
So, a monster movie with a message, a cautionary tale about greed.
Exactly. A lot of Ultra Q episodes do that. They're fun monster stories on the surface, but then there's this deeper layer poking at human nature and social stuff,
Yeah, like you were saying earlier about how Ultra Q kind of tapped into the anxieties of the time.
Oh, absolutely. The 18th Project, that's a good example. 1960s Japan. They were seriously worried about overpopulation.
Yeah.
And in that episode, the government's got this experiment. It goes totally haywire, and people start shrinking, like down to 18th their normal size.
Whoa. Okay, so it's tapping into fears about, like, resources running out, cities getting too crowded, technology going too far.
Exactly. It's not just monsters rampaging. It's how all that crazy stuff impacts people.
Yeah.
You know?
That's deep. So, greed monster, shrinking people.
Huh?
What else have we got? I'm ready for more weirdness.
Oh, you're in for a treat. Remember Blazing Glory?
That one rings a bell.
Well, it's about a boxer, right?
Yeah.
Except his pet is, get this, a gator mutant. And this gator mutant It could predict who's going to win a boxing match.
A gator mutant boxing predictor. That's dot creative.
Classic Ultra Q. They were fearless, throwing all these wild ideas together, and somehow it just clicks.
Totally. And speaking of wild, you mentioned this whole lost English dub of Ultra Q. Like, it exists, but nobody's ever seen it.
Right. Totally a lost media mystery.
Yeah.
It was all ready to go, English dub, the whole thing. But TV was changing fast. Color TV was taking over. Nobody wanted black and white anymore. So Ultra Q got shelved. And then Ultraman came along, filmed in color, and it was a smash hit.
It blows my mind that somewhere out there, maybe in some forgotten box, are those lost English episodes.
It's a fascinating thought, right? Like, what could have been?
So after all that, the big question, does Ultra Q still hold up today? Like black and white vintage effects, would it grab a modern audience?
It's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Something we'll be diving into as we go on. But I think there's a timeless quality to Ultra Q.
Can't wait to explore that more.
It's kind of wild to think about, How all those black and white visuals, those old school effects, how they land with someone watching today.
Right. It's like you've got your modern viewer, right? They're all about those CGI explosions, super high def, everything. But then there's also this kind of growing love for practical effects, that retro look,
Exactly. We've seen it a lot lately. Practical effects are making a comeback, especially in movies and shows, trying to capture a certain vibe.
Yeah.
And those handmade effects, it's like they have this charm, right? This realness that CGI just can't quite match.
I totally get that. There's something about those miniature sets, those monster suits, like you can almost feel the work that went into them, the creativity. It sparks the imagination differently.
It's a different kind of spectacle, but it can be just as powerful.
Yeah.
And Ultra Q, they were pushing the limits of those practical effects, like Eiji Tsuburaya. Total pioneer. He came up with all these new techniques, compositing, miniatures, optical effects, blew people's minds back then.
You mentioned how he was like repurposing all those Toho monster suits. Was that just a budget thing or was there something more to it?
Yeah, saving money was definitely part of it. But I think it goes a little deeper, By using those Toho monsters like Godzilla and Rodan, those are already cultural icons. People knew them. So when you see those same monsters, but kind of twisted into something new for Ultra Q, it creates this cool mix of the familiar and the unexpected.
Yeah, like they were playing with this shared monster mythology, giving it their own spin. Must have been super exciting for viewers back then.
It's solely smart. You're playing with the audience's expectations, then you kind of turn them on their head.
I love it. So we've talked monsters, effects, the whole historical backdrop. But what about, the human side of things? Jun, Yuriko, Ippei, those investigators at the heart of Ultra Q. Do their characters stand out amidst all the sci-fi craziness?
They're kind of like your classic archetypes,
Yeah.
The reporter, the scientist, the pilot. But the writing, the acting, it's all done with a lot of heart. And humor, too. That's what makes them relatable.
And they're not just, like, standing around reacting to the monsters, right? They're trying to figure stuff out, solve the mysteries, even when it gets dangerous.
Yeah, they're not passive. They're in the thick of it. And the relationships. That adds another layer, this human drama in the middle of all the weirdness. They're arguing, supporting each other, making tough calls. Their humanity shines through.
It's like a grounding element, right? In this world that's constantly like right on the edge of crazy, we see them reacting, struggling. It helps us process everything that's happening,
It's one of the things that makes Ultra Q so good. It's not just about the spectacle. It's about how regular people deal with that spectacle.
It's like we're right there with them, feeling the awe, the terror, facing the unknown.
Thinking about it, Ultra Q is kind of like a testing ground, right? Tsuburaya Productions, they were trying so many things. Storytelling, effects, genre conventions, you name it.
It was like a giant experiment, pushing boundaries, seeing what worked, and it all kind of led to Ultraman, which then became, well, massive.
Totally.
Yeah.
And it's crazy to see how stuff that became like Ultraman signatures, they were already there in Ultra Q teamwork. Thinking about science and ethics, that blend of action and social commentary, it's all there in the DNA.
The blueprint for a whole franchise hiding in plain sight. Amazing how this black and white show from '66 could lay the foundation for something that's still going strong today. And speaking of hiding in plain sight, that lost English dub, man, it still blows my mind. What are the chances those episodes ever turn up?
You know what they say, never say never. Lost stuff has a way of popping up when you least expect it.
Yeah, it'd be crazy, right? Someone finds a dusty box in their attic and bam, the lost Ultra Q dub. What a find.
It'd be like buried treasure.
Yeah.
A piece of history.
Right.
And it would be so cool to see how they translated those stories for a whole new audience.
I know, right? So we've covered a lot of ground here. Ultra Q's wild mix of genres, its role as the granddaddy of Ultraman, all the behind-the-scenes magic.
We've talked about how it reflected the anxieties of its time, how they used what they had so cleverly, how it set the stage for something truly global. But for me, it all comes back to one thing. The reason Ultra Q still resonates, why people still care, it's not just nostalgia. It taps into something deeper, something universal.
That's a great point. What do you think that something universal is?
I think it's that fear, the fear of the unknown, that feeling you get when you see something, something you just can't explain. It kind of messes with your head a little bit. And Ultra Q, it nails that feeling perfectly.
You're right, it totally does. Whether it's like a giant monster crawling out of the ocean or some weird artifact that science can't explain, there's something about it that just like grabs you,
Yeah.
hits those primal fears and fascinations.
And what's really cool is like how Ultra Q mixes those fears with humor,
Yeah.
It's not all dark and serious. There's this playfulness, this willingness to be a little absurd. And that's what makes it so charming.
I know what you mean. Like, you'll be in the middle of this intense monster attack, right? And then suddenly the characters are, like, cracking jokes. It's that contrast that keeps you on the edge of your seat. Like, they're saying, hey, this is nuts, but let's not freak out too much.
I think it's so smart. Like that ability to laugh at the unknown, it's almost like a coping mechanism, something that speaks to people no matter when they're watching it. It's like, yeah, we might not get it, but we can still laugh about it, find the fun in the chaos.
That's such a good point. Like, a reminder that even when things are tough, scary, confusing, you can still find a little light, a little laughter. And that feels, I don't know, especially important today.
Oh, totally. Wrapping up this deep dive, it makes me wonder, what would a modern Ultra Q even look like? Could they capture that same feeling, that mix of the familiar and the totally bizarre, but make it work for, today's audience?
It's a great question. I mean, think about it. The world in 2024 is so different from 1966. What kind of monsters, what kind of mysteries would like really hit home now?
Our anxieties, they've definitely shifted. But the core fears, those haven't changed that much. We're still worried about technology getting out of control, the environment, social unrest. Ultra Q dealt with that stuff back then, and it's still super relevant.
Yeah, for sure. So instead of giant radioactive lizards, maybe it's like monsters born from pollution,
Hmm.
or AI gone rogue, or mysteries about cyber attacks, or gene editing, who knows?
Exactly. And think about how all those anxieties show up in our everyday lives, right? Social media, our phones, this constant flood of information. It's all ripe for Ultra Q stories.
Oh, yeah, totally. It's like the monsters could be metaphors for all the stuff we're dealing with as a society. Like the fear of losing our privacy, feeling overwhelmed by, the online world. That could make for some seriously intense sci-fi.
And what about the characters, right? Imagine June, Yuriko, Abi, but today, investigating those modern mysteries, trying to make sense of this world that's gotten so complex and unpredictable.
That would be so cool. I think that core dynamic, the skeptical scientist, the brave reporter, the pilot who keeps everyone grounded, it still works. They'd be like our guides through this crazy maze of modern anxieties, helping us understand the monsters, both the real ones and, the metaphorical ones.
So, to everyone listening out there, we're leaving you with this. If you were going to reboot Ultra Q right now for 2024, what stories would you tell? What keeps you up at night? What mysteries are out there just waiting to be uncovered?
Think about those things that make you wonder, that challenge how you see the world.
Let your imagination loose. Who knows? Maybe your idea will be the spark for the next generation of Ultra Q creators. Because that legacy, that blend of weirdness, heart, and the human element, it deserves to live on.
And that's the heart of Ultra Q. Facing the unknown, questioning the impossible, finding the extraordinary in the ordinary. So until next time, happy deep diving.